Hello and welcome to the Exponential Australia Church Leaders Podcast. We are so glad that you have joined us on today's episode as we hear from such a wide range of Australian and global leaders when it comes to the church here in Australia and the opportunities that exist in front of us to multiply and church plant and see new initiatives started in our country. Today is a very exciting day. It's actually the first time that we've had several interviewees on our podcast. There is a first time for everything, and I think you're going to particularly enjoy today's episode as we hear what is quite a unique story that God is writing in the nation's capital in Canberra. And so today we are joined by Caleb Reid, who is the location pastor of Impact Church, and also by Christian Nobleza, who is, and I'll let him explain his title because it is a mouthful. We're going to get to that in just a moment. But maybe we'll start with you, Christian. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself, your role, what that includes, and then I'll pass over to Caleb as well.
Yeah, no worries, Charlie. Thank you for the invitation to be part of this conversation. It's really exciting. So my name's Christian. I'm the mission and culture coordinator in the Catholic Archdiocese of Canberra and Goulburn. And what that involves, I've basically got oversight for young adult ministry throughout the Archdiocese, our outreach to our universities, young professionals, that kind of age demographic. But I kind of have a leadership role in the broader youth and young adult team here in our Archdiocese, and support other sort of initiatives around our youth ministers as well, who we employ about 20 of them that serve in various contexts in parishes and schools and in the university space as well. But yeah, I'm recently a recent arrival to Canberra. I was actually born here, many years ago, but moved and grew up basically in Brisbane, but then did various ministry in places like Sydney, and I've just prior to coming back to Canberra about 2 years ago now, I was living and working in the UK. Doing some youth and young adult ministry up there. But yeah, that's kind of where I fit in here in Canberra now.
Amazing. Caleb, how about you, mate? Tell us a bit more about yourself and what's brought you to Canberra recently and what you do with yourself.
Yeah, for sure. Look, we're two recent imports, really, aren't we, Christian? It's funny we've both come from the far north, from sunny Queensland down to Canberra now, and the place has won us over. For my wife and I, we came down here to be a part of a church called Impact Church, which is in the southern part of the ACT. When we were approached with the idea of coming here by the lead pastors of the church family who came to us and said, "Hey, what do you think about Canberra? Would you head down to Canberra?" And we went, "Nope." And what else is there but Questacon and the War Memorial and Parliament House, right? That was very much our impression. The classic Year 6 student went to Canberra once, didn't know much else about it, but I feel like God has a sense of humor when someone says a firm no to anything. So we went on this journey over a few weeks of kind of praying, and it was independent of one another that we prayed about it, wrestled with it. And similarly to Christian, we'd had some, Christian did well because he actually got there before the world closed down. We had some ambitions to try and do a little bit of travel together and a little bit of, I guess, adventuring and exploring what God might have for us. And so we had this real feeling of, we're feeling unsettled where we are. I don't know whether you guys have ever gone through a season like that before. Totally. And then when this opportunity for Canberra came across the table, silly me, didn't recognize it for what it was straight away. No, I don't want to move there. And then after a few weeks of really praying about it and talking to some people in our lives who we really trusted and that kind of thing. And then, of course, one another, we realized, maybe this was the thing that we've been feeling unsettled for all along. So that was about 18 months ago. We arrived here in January last year and said that we would give it 2 years. And we've actually just purchased a property here in Canberra. So we put down roots. We're calling it home for the next season. We just love being a part of the church community that we arrived to. But then friendships like the one that we've struck up with Christian and some wonderful other friends, peers and church leaders across this region has got us really excited about what's happening here and wanting to be a part of it for beyond just that 2 years that we'd originally thought was the story.
That's amazing, Caleb. And, I'm about to come to more of why we're here together today, but I wonder as well if you kind of speak to, in a sense, what you were coming into at Impact was something of a church revitalization, an opportunity to kind of do a new thing within the life of an existing church. Do you want to share briefly about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we arrived here to a church, as I said, in the southern part of the ACT here. Wonderful community that was there. About 20 people at the time who were a part of that community. They had a property, they had land, they were well established in the community, had been here for some time. But yeah, it was just they'd come through a period, as many churches and church leaders can probably relate to, off the back of the last few years, that had led them into some challenges. Which caused them to seek a partnership with, I mentioned earlier, there's a church on the Sunshine Coast, Sun Coast Church, led by pastors Jonathan and Chloe Gulo. They are part of the same network of churches. And a relationship was built with Jonathan and Chloe at Sun Coast, and they decided to come together and work together and share resources and ideas and come under the leadership of Jono and Chloe. And so Eleanor and I came here as the local leadership, the boots on the ground, if you will, to kind of lead that partnership with Suncoast Church and kind of discover what was next for this community impact church here in Canberra. And so, yeah, little did we know that 18 months later we would also be working very closely with Christian to create a brand new community in Braddon. But I'm sure we're going to get into that a little bit more later on as well.
No, absolutely. And that's a great segue because, of course, as each of you have shared, you've kind of recent imports to Canberra, which is a city close to my heart. I grew up in Canberra. It's always been a very interesting place to do ministry and to live and to and just the transience of a city like Canberra. I'd love to just begin part of why we're here together today, because people must be wondering why these two different people from different parts of God's church, how are they on a podcast together? They're from the same city, but what were the origins for you guys in terms of meeting one another, how you initially connected, and then maybe begin to tell some of the story of how you guys have become such close friends and the opportunities that have emerged for new initiatives in Canberra. Maybe we'll start, Christian, with you, just to share a bit of how you guys first connected.
Yeah, it sounds like we're dating or something. I don't know how this kind of goes down.
We do go out for dinner a lot, mate.
I feel like do I go out with dinners more than you do with your own wife? I'm not anyway. I'll leave that for another conversation. But the way I recall it, Charlie, is that, as I said, I've only relatively come new into Canberra again, and as I said, my responsibility is around sort of the young adult space particularly. We have a very rich history here in the Archdiocese of a vibrant of youth ministry framework, I suppose, or pathway. And we were just looking to extend that pathway to the next age demographic as our young people who we've been working with and journeying with over these years are starting to age up, into the university age, into graduating from university. So we just wanted to consolidate a lot of resources around that. Coming from Brisbane, in one sense, I was very familiar with the Red Frogs sort of organization, and my colleague and here with me one morning was actually catching up with Caleb on a separate reason. I think it was to look at a combined churches event around Pentecost last year. And what ended up happening was that Hugh gave me a call and basically said, "Hey, Christian, I'm meeting with this guy called Caleb, and he says he's been part of Red Frogs, and I know you've spoken about that in the office. Did you want to come down and have a chat as well and just see what that could mean for our young adult ministry?" And that's basically the first instance of how Caleb and I think, got to know each other and meet each other, was simply over a cup of coffee down here in a place we call Monica, and got chatting from there and excited about perhaps, could we expand and use the tool of Red Frogs as a way of reaching out to the young adults and the university students, particularly in the city. So,
Caleb, how about your version of events, mate? I mean, all good things start with a cup of coffee. But then what began to ensue is you guys connected and just kind of worked out a joint heart for a similar people group.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we will learn as we tell more of these stories. It's never just a cup of coffee with Christian. I think there were actually tacos involved that day of a very gourmet kind. They were
Potato
very
fries
nice.
as well. Mind you, at 9:30 in the morning, which I thought was a bit of an achievement unlocked. Yeah,
that's right. That's right. So yeah, that was the beginning for me. Obviously, being here in Canberra, I was very enthused by the idea of finding out what was already going on here in the city, and it became pretty clear that Christian and the gentleman Hugh that Christian mentioned, who I was meeting with, as Christian said, had some fantastic initiatives already happening in the youth and young adult space. And one thing for our community that we had identified in the place that we were, was in Canberra, there's this psychology around if it's more than 15 minutes away, you kind of just don't go there. And we just recognized that where we were based currently, where our gatherings and projects were currently based, we just weren't reaching that enormous population of university students that were here in Canberra. And that was something that personally I was very passionate about. But as I began to, share some of my hopes for being in Canberra and being able to reach, we've got the Australian National University, the University of Canberra, you've got Charles Sturt University, you've got the Australian Catholic University, University of New South Wales there at Royal Military College, as well as ADFA. So there is just an enormous number of next generation leaders, thinkers, mums, dads, politicians, decision makers, concentrated for a period of their lives right here in Canberra in a relatively small area. And so it's just too good a missional opportunity not to pass up. So in beginning to think about that and beginning to network and meet some different people across the city who shared those passions, I bumped into Christian and Hugh pretty quickly and discovered that they had already been real catalysts for thinking about this, the next generation and how we were going to engage them in the story of God's kingdom here in this city. So as Christian mentioned, I met with Hugh to discuss an event which, this is where the fun of this partnership begins to emerge for me. I don't think I'd ever been to an ecumenical Pentecost event.
Wow.
But nonetheless, I met with Hugh and he invited me to come and share a little bit of my story and my story with Red Frogs and my passion for reaching the next generation at this event that Hugh and Christian and a few others were organizing. And I think one standout moment in this whole journey for me actually occurred at that event. When I got off the stage, and the next part after sharing a little bit of my hopes and my story, and what I was kind of praying for as a new arrival in Canberra, Archbishop Christopher Prowse, who obviously is Christian and Hugh's oversight, took the stage as part of a Q&A platform. Sorry, it was a Q&A platform with a few other leaders from the city. And after he came off, I just took the time to go over and say, Archbishop, thank you so much for sharing. That was deeply encouraging. I was just, and really, this is an important part of the story, right, Christian? Like the way our leaders, for me, lead Pastor Jono, and for you, Archbishop Christopher, the way that they've released us and cheered us on in this mission for the next generation has been significant. So I went across to Archbishop Christopher and said, mate, thank you so much for sharing your heart. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit about what you hope for this city. And this is one of this is a memory I will never forget. He said, did I surprise you with my passion for the next generation? And I said, oh, well, no, not really. I probably just haven't had too much to do with the Catholic Church in the past. So it was just deeply encouraging to hear it. And he said, oh, well, here you go. Let me give you a hug to wash some of that maybe expectation away. And Archbishop Christopher gave me this great hug. And all of a sudden I knew, man, there is something unique happening here in this city that I really, really want to be a part of. So if Archbishop ever hears this, thank you, Archbishop, for that hug. And
that's beautiful.
Well, of course, thank you for the way that the way our leaders have cheered us on as we've taken on some of these initiatives and projects together has been really significant.
What a beautiful story. Thanks so much for sharing that, Caleb. And I wonder now, as we fast forward kind of like 18 months on, like obviously a lot's happened in the last 18 months, that it started with an initial coffee and relationship building and recognize your unity in the Lord and the opportunities to do things together. And I'd love to dive into some of those values in just a moment. But 18 months on, what does that now look like as you guys have been able to continue to journey alongside, apart from eating lots of tacos and sweet potato fries and all the great things that are along the way? Maybe tell us, and chicken, yeah. Maybe Christian, if you tell us like where has that landed now? And of course, we recognise this is a live story that is still being written by God in Canberra. But what does that look like now?
As you said, Charlie, it's a very new thing. And when we introduced this episode, we spoke of this place called Braddon. It's the very heart of the city. It's one of our inner suburbs. And it's a place where we have the Archdiocese has a church there called St. Patrick's. And it very much is a transient church in the sense that it serves, I guess, the CBD community. It's a church that really only has one weekend service there, but most of the week is actually just a lunchtime mass. So people come in and have mass in the middle of the day, Tuesdays to Fridays, and that's it. There's no real other use of that church. And the thing, though, about St. Patrick's is that not only its proximity to the CBD, but for those that are familiar with where the Australian National University is, it's 10 minutes walk to that as well. And I think, as has been shared, like Caleb and I, our heart for the young adults of the city, the university students of the city, the future politicians, lawmakers, doctors, accountants, business leaders, media, people, like they're in that institution. And it's almost as though we, over the course of meeting from last Pentecost right up to today, that hasn't changed. Our heart still is for those young people particularly. But towards the end of last year, as I was sort of trying to map out what would young adult ministry on the side of the Archdiocese look like for 2022, I put a crazy idea out there to Caleb, and I said, "Hey, Caleb, like, if we were to take over St. Patrick's, or if we were to offer something out of St. Patrick's, say on a Sunday night that would be akin to sort of some kind of young adult gathering, would you be in?" And it was as simple as that. And, the enthusiasm and I suppose the openness, immediate openness to say, absolutely, we got to be where the young people are at. And to craft something called Sunday Sessions, and I think Sunday Sessions or Sunday Sesh, as in our Australian culture, has a particular meaning in other contexts, and we deliberately adopted that name because we wanted to challenge that other context and say that instead of a couple of hours on a Sunday arvo, drinking till you can't remember. Would I say that what we are offering is in a couple of hours where we are actually offering young adults something that will sustain them into their lives going forward into the future. And the various conversations happened with our local parish there, which the church belongs, falls under, and the local parish priest there. Believe it or not, I went into this conversation with our amazing priest there, Father Emil, and I said, "Father Emil, this is on our heart. This is where we feel young adult ministry could go in our archdiocese in 2022. These are all the details. These are some of the key people involved. How would you have it?" And, Father Emil's response to me that meeting, when I met with him that afternoon, towards the end of last year, was, "Christian, I've been praying for something like this for the last 10 years. Wow. Father Emil's had a number of different roles in the Archdiocese, one of which was as vocations director in the Archdiocese, so the guy that's charged with supporting young men who are exploring priesthood in the Catholic Church. And so he's always been attuned to the needs of young people and young adults, looking at the direction that their life wants to take. And so for him to graciously provide us with St. Patrick's as a space where we can operate out of was an immense blessing.
Christian, if I could jump in there, because Of course, for many of our listeners, and we champion and cheer on the Catholic Church in Australia as well. Like we want to see, new expressions of God's kingdom all throughout His church, but particularly for those who maybe don't come from a Catholic context.
Yeah.
Like that's actually quite a revolutionary thing, by way of a new initiative. Arguably a new church plant that might look a little bit different, but it's a new community in order to reach a new group of people. Could you speak just a little bit more to just how, I guess, how much of a faithful step that is for Father Emil to actually go, this is something that the Catholic Church in Canberra wants to be a part of doing?
Yeah, I would never underestimate that, Charlie. I think it's a massive faith step that we're taking here in the Archdiocese. And it's not that youth ministry or young adult ministry, outreach to young adults hasn't existed. But as you've sort of said, it's a fresh expression. It's a new expression that's meeting today's needs. And I think as I've come into this role, with the responsibility of developing an approach and a framework and building out a team to look at how are we responding to the young adults of this city. I can't help but say that what may have worked in the past isn't guaranteed to work today. And that it's about approaching this with a discernment, a sensitivity to what is God asking of us now. And certainly there's glimpses of that if we are to reflect on what God has asked of us in the past and to learn lessons of the past, not to throw out the baby with the bathwater to borrow that phrase, but it's really to take what we've learned, but like what we're now seeing with the eyes of faith in the city. And the opportunities that are presenting itself. I think probably the biggest hallmark to what we have that's shaping young adult ministry in the Archdiocese here is particularly our partnerships with other Christian churches throughout the city. It's not just Caleb's church that the Archdiocese is looking at, but it's numerous other churches who have particular giftings, who have particular strengths that we would love to be drawing on in order for us to experience a revitalization ourselves as an Archdiocese. Right. I think that the biggest hope for me is that all of this collaboration and partnership isn't trying to, create a new church that sort of picks the best things out of everyone else but then has to lower to the lowest common denominator just so that everybody can sort of be around the same table. No, I think what it is, it's about drawing on the strengths and the gifts of each of our ecclesial communities and seeing where there are moments of collaboration and shared mission and pressing into that as hard as we can without necessarily compromising our own individual identities as well. That's what I feel is being built up as the body of Christ here in Canberra.
Amazing. Christian, and that was quite a bold thing to, I guess, instigate that conversation with Caleb initially, right? Like what would it look like to do something that would have been outside of Caleb's wheelhouse? And Caleb, I'd love to hear from you as you heard that potentially for the first time and began to creatively consider this as a concept to be part of together in order to reach, that area of Braddon. What was your initial reaction? What was your thought process? What was going on in your head as you received this kind of idea?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'd go back. I shared that event. I shared that story from that event earlier about meeting Archbishop for the first time and getting to know Christian and you a little better at that event as well. And there were church leaders from right across the region who were invited to be a part of that. And the theme of that day was actually unity in mission, which is this really nice phrase. And, it preached well on the day and everyone got into it and clapped their hands and stuff. But it was the way that we followed that with serious conversations. Okay, what does that actually mean? And as I said, it became very clear to Eleanor and I and our church community as we shared it with some of the elders from our church and with John and Chloe back in Queensland, the next generation, we want to be a church that is interested in those who aren't here yet. We want to be a church that is for this city and for the next generation of leaders in this city, and them getting to know Jesus for themselves. And so for us coming into, we were gonna attempt that anyway. We were already making strides. We were providing more opportunities for people who were already part of our community to serve in that way, to connect with students and the next generation in that way, in that part of the city. But to come off the back of an event with the theme Unity in Mission, and to have the Catholic Church in Canberra actually come to the table and say, we're in. Here's something we can bring. And it was more than just a building. It was far more than just a building, because I must admit, at first, when Christian talked about it, in my head, it was like, okay, so we're going to get the keys to this parish in the city to use as a space. But far more than that, it's been a partnership in the sense that we've shared. As we've talked about, Christian and I, we pray together, we eat together, we craft these opportunities for the people who are a part of Sunday sessions now to serve the universities in our city together. It's been a full-on ecumenical partnership between the two of us right from day dot, which has just been so encouraging. So to see that it was not just words for a nice event at Pentecost, but it was the genuine sentiment of the leaders within the Archdiocese of Canberra-Goulburn. And as Christian said, for many other churches in the region who are sitting up and taking notice and wanting to be a part of what's going on, was just tremendously encouraging. And so I think as much as it was a nice catchphrase, a nice war cry for the day of that idea of unity and mission, we've let the mission that we're sharing be the driving force behind this, and perhaps that's why there's just been so much synergy right from the start. So at first, to your question, how did I feel? Just amazed that it was going to be more than just words, and it was actually going to turn into action, and we were going to make some serious strides for the kingdom together here in Canberra.
Wow.
I mean, I might throw, you really emphasize that point that Caleb's sort of communicating, that we're not doing this together just for the sake of being together, and that the optics look nice, and oh, look, the Christian churches are playing nicely together. It's beyond that. I think for us, our focus is the mission. And that's why, whether we name that as the university outreach that we're sharing in, or using tools like Red Frogs, or the Alpha course, which is all, part of the strategy that we have going on at Sunday sessions. It's a common language and a tool that we can each use within our, that honors our respective church traditions. But in the same way, most recently, something like Youth Alive as well, one of our other dear friends, Chris Vanderwielen, is bringing about a real, renewal in how Youth Alive is operating around the Canberra region. And we are 100% behind him, again, in that. Not because we just want to, he's a nice guy and sings.
And
really
great musician.
Great musician. He sings well. He's got a voice of an angel. But he's also someone who is committed to seeing this city flipped over for good and for God. And when that happens, and I think that's the thing that's really energizing us and motivating us. If we see Canberra on fire and really turned on to what God is asking of us, that's going to have a ripple effect, I believe, in faith and in hope to the rest of this country. And ultimately, would I love to see Australia become even more of a bright spot of the Holy Spirit at work in our world today.
Wow, that's such an encouragement, Christian. Really, I do think this is quite an incredible story that God is writing, that I'm praying along with you is going to have a catalytic effect right across our nation as we see opportunities for more humility, more unity in the gospel, more collaboration, because we do know that one church is not sufficient to reach a whole city. We need lots of churches working together for the sake of a region. But I'm also not, as you rightly just said then, Christian, I'm not that comes at a cost. That's never as easy as it seems. Like in a perfect world, of course these things would just happen very naturally, but there's a cost to that. And I'd love to hear from you guys, particularly as you have gone about collaboration and working together and deep levels of friendship and trust in one another, and particularly in the gospel and all that God is wanting to do in Canberra, maybe if you could bring us in on just some of the considerations and even some of maybe the anxieties and fears and the challenges that you've also experienced amongst, like, what did that actually look like for two, the Catholic Church that is thousands of years old, and how does a Catholic Church and a Pentecostal church work together well? Like, bring us in on some of that story, because I think people would also love to hear about some of that.
Yeah. I think, Caleb, would you probably help the listeners and watchers of this maybe using Sunday sessions and what it actually is? Like, I mean, we've been talking about it for the last 25 minutes, but I don't think anyone really understands what we're actually doing there in Braddon. And that might actually serve to highlight some of the considerations that we've had to make.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. And I was just going to say, I think, and Christian's really been a pioneer for this, as you got at earlier, Charlie. It's a significant thing for the Catholic Church to take part in this new expression, and Christians having some wonderful conversations with people within the teams that he works with about what that looks like. So, Christian, I really want to give you the floor on this one too, mate. But yeah, for the sake of making sure that we all know what Sunday Sessions is, we've basically created a gathering on Sunday night. So it kicks off at 4:30. With Eucharistic adoration, so that the guys come in and do that, and then Mass at 5 o'clock. And so that, if you like, is the quote unquote Catholic part of the afternoon, where the priest does all the things that are part of a usual Mass. And then as that wraps up at approaching 6 o'clock, we have what we've called an intermission during Canberra winter. That means some great fire pits and some hot drinks, so people can at least somewhat stay warm. And that runs for about 30 minutes. And then, so what happens is you've got this community coming out from Mass, and you've got this community arriving right on cue at 6 o'clock for intermission. And it's this intermingling of two different, whether it be churched people who are not from the Catholic faith. You've got the guys who are part of the Catholic faith, and then of course we've got a deep passion to see unchurched or de-churched people coming along to participate in the conversations that we've created. And so there's that intermission, 6 till 6:30, some great time together, just gives some opportunity to meet and greet and create some connections. And then we come in at 6:30 for what we've called an all-in session, which is perhaps what most people would see as a traditional church service, with a couple of songs, and then we break open a conversation around a question that we think is pertinent for the next generation, and we take a look at what Jesus and of course the Word would have to say about that question. So the kind of language we've put around it is a place to ask the big questions together. But to sum it all up, it's a gathering opportunity for young adults of all faith or no faith backgrounds across the city that we've worked together to create.
And I think some of the practical considerations, at least that I've had to factor in on my side of the equation, or the partnership, is like, we're using, for instance, a Catholic church, and walking into such a space, there are sensitivities. We need to know that it's obviously a sacred place, and that we need to set up the room in such a way that honors that and safeguards that for what is really valuable and important to Catholics. And I should say that everything that we're doing at Sunday Sessions very much does honor our Catholic tradition, that it's based around the Word, it's based around community, coming around that, being sustained by the Word. But why we incorporate those Catholic elements prior to the intermission, namely Eucharistic adoration. And for those listening who don't know what that is, it's basically just a particular form of prayer in the Catholic tradition that is centered around what we believe around the communion becoming the actual body of Christ, and that there's a moment that is reserved in, and we just pray before that, as a way of being probably in the most intimate way connected to Jesus at that moment. But then that connects onto Sunday Mass. Why we have those two elements as part of the Sunday session offering is that we are recognizing that we need to create touch points for young adults wherever they are on the journey. So the beautiful thing about why it's not called the Sunday session as in a singular, but rather Sunday sessions, is because we recognize from there's an opportunity to connect from 4:30 to 5, 5 to 6, 6 to 6:30, 6:30 to 7:30. Throughout that time, you can come and go as you please. You can come to whatever you need to come to. You can stay for whatever you want to stay for. What we found there is that while not everyone that comes to the Catholic bit stays on for All In, or that people who come to the All In, they don't really come to Mass, that's fine. But what we are finding is that we are connecting uniquely with about 70 to 80 young adults across a span of 4 hours that is not happening anywhere else in the city in the way that we are doing it. And that's something that we're incredibly proud of. It's incredibly new. We are still working it out. But I think one of the things, when we entertain this, and developing this this project really over this last 18 months, what the thing is how can we be aware of each other's traditions and set up spaces and schedule speakers and create ways of discussion and engaging in questions that actually honors each tradition. As I said earlier, what we're not doing is trying to create a watered down, lowest common denominator experience just so that people all feel comfortable in the room. But it's about bringing the real beauty, the truth, and the goodness in each of our traditions and seeing how we can craft that together in a way that's actually salient and that resonates with the people who come at the different points of entry throughout those 4 hours of gathering.
Amazing. Caleb, how about you? Because of course you've been up for an adventure, but what were some of the considerations that, as a younger church leader has taken on this church to revitalize, and then to have this idea of partnering with the Catholic Church would have been one that would have been very different from your tradition, wherever you've come from by way of the Pentecostal Church. What were some of the considerations for you?
Yeah, absolutely. It was, for us, it was a brand new opportunity, right? So it was taking something on, not necessarily changing something that was already in existence. So perhaps that makes the conversation even a little bit different right from the get-go. In terms of St. Patrick's, obviously wasn't an existing space where we had a gathering, but it was something we were invited into by Christian and Father Emil and the whole Archdiocese. But for us, it was obviously... there was a few times where I would bring it up with some of the kind of core leadership team of our existing community in the southern part of Canberra there in Monash, and they would go, "Hang on, did you say the Catholic Church wants to partner with us in this?" And I would just simply say, look, they're as much interested in the next generation getting to meet Jesus as we are when we start to have a conversation with them. And so it was just bringing it back to the mission. It wasn't, as I love the way Christian said it before, it's not just for the optics. It's not just to tick the box that we hung out with a denomination that's different to ours. But it's actually to see that a mission of reaching de-churched, unchurched, young next generation, are we more effective in doing this together? The answer we've come to a resounding conclusion is yes. So we're going to keep going with it. And so whenever questions get raised or someone brings up a hesitation, it's about patiently sitting with them and going, hey, I hear where you're coming from. I understand there have been things in the past that obviously mean maybe this is difficult for you to get your head around, but hey, what's our mission? What are we called to do? To go into all the world and make disciples? What's the most effective way you can see us doing that? What is the most Christ-like way that you can see us doing that? When you think about John 13:35, how are they going to know? How are they going to know that you are my disciples? Well, it's going to be by the way that we love one another. And so, yeah, the opportunity, just bringing it back to core mission and the way that Jesus is called to live us. Called us to live that out has been a real key to making sure that we're all staying on the same page throughout this whole process. And as Christian has emphasized, this is brand new. We're only 18 months in. So who knows, Charlie, 6 months, 12 months down the track, there's going to be more to this story to share for sure.
Absolutely. And again, I just want to reiterate, we're so excited for you guys and all that God is doing in that. And I think this is a really exciting prototype for the Australian church. And I guess my last question for each of you guys today, particularly as we bring this conversation to a close, and we recognize that stories like this may or may not be commonplace in the future for the Aussie church. And of course, this is a very unique story. But I guess to wrap up our time, what level of encouragement would you want to offer to other church leaders are thinking about opportunities to collaborate with other churches in their area. We recognize sometimes it's going to work, sometimes it's not. Sometimes there are going to be differences that don't need to be divisions, but where there are opportunities to work together for the sake of mission, how would you want to encourage other listeners today who might find themselves in that kind of a situation or opportunity that is before them?
I think for me, one of the practical reflection points that I would offer people in this, in this space would be, look at the strengths of your church, look at the strength of your congregations, look at the strength of your ministries, and what are those? But then look at the areas that perhaps where you lack, or where you may need some help, or some, that perhaps are not undeveloped, but perhaps underdeveloped. But then trying to align those areas where perhaps you could develop more, but looking at other churches who are smashing that and doing that really well. That's something that I've definitely experienced working with Caleb. Is his way of relational ministry with people and just striking up conversations has just been amazing, and that has really colored and added so much value and enriched how our young adult ministry here in our archdiocese. We've had him do some work with our youth ministers, for instance, around how to strike up conversations, especially in places where they're non-Catholic settings. I think there's a space where, or a reality rather, in youth young adult ministry in the Catholic context, where often that only happens in Catholic spaces and places of Catholic buildings, whereas when you throw youth ministers out into the field and go into university spaces and their workplaces and secular places, what skills have they necessarily been passed on to in order to be effective in mission in those areas? That's something that I've greatly learned from Caleb very much. But yeah, my encouragement to leaders: look at where your strengths are, but look at where you could get some help with, and actually have the humility to look at and put your hand up and say, hey, this is an area that we see you doing really well that we could actually do with your help with.
Mate, that's very, very generous of you, and it is. I think you're spot on. There's some strengths that you guys have that we have just gone, wow. There is some work we could do there in order to be better in that space. And the way that you've coached us through, I think of one of the funny moments was a Q&A night where someone asked a question, and it was during the all-in session, so we had Catholic faith background in the room, we had unchurched in the room, and then we had, of course, some from our Christian community in the room, and someone asked the question about communion and what that meant for the Catholic faith as opposed to maybe what it might be different for ours. And Hugh, your colleague Christian, shared this he just shared beautifully on the significance of that moment, on the chance to come around and remember what Jesus has done in sacrificing himself for each and every one of us. And it really moved myself. And you mentioned Chris earlier, and Chris summed it up beautifully. He said, geez, all my life in my faith background, Coke and Tim Tams has generally been the standard for communion. You have just taught me a whole bunch more about how significant that was. So anyways, we're both learning from one another. But the other thing I would say, and I know we're wrapping up, so I won't labor on this point, but I've probably already elaborated on it a fair bit, but this idea of looking at the mission that you exist for as a community. And is the way that you are gathering, is the way that you are shaping opportunities to serve those in your city actually serving that mission? Or are you just doing it because that's the way it's always been done? And if we're honest enough with ourselves to ask those questions and say, what would be the most effective way to pursue the mission? In other words, the Great Commission given to us. Then I think you'll see that Jesus was onto something when he talked about the idea of unity and going together. And it becomes pretty clear pretty quickly that going together is going to achieve some pretty amazing results. So just being honest enough to have those conversations and say, is what we are doing best serving our mission? What could we do better?
Totally. Guys, I love the fact that you have been the living embodiment of not being about egos or logos, and recognizing that when the tide rises, it actually affects everyone, and we get to do this together. And that's our great prayer for the Australian church on behalf of Exponential and many other like-minded organizations, that where churches collaborate together and do amazing things together. That's where we're really going to see the tide change in our nation. So thank you so much, Christian and Caleb, for being with us today. It's been an enormous joy.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Charlie. Thanks for having us.